Back live on Chatter, everyone. After weeks of back and forth, New York lawmakers have finally struck a deal to legalize cannabis in the Empire State. The bill, which was released on Sunday, has been touted by Governor Cuomo as a driver of much-needed economic opportunity and by lawmakers as a means of addressing the devastation that cannabis criminalization has caused in communities of color. So here to discuss a lot of the details for us is our Cheddar Cannabis reporter, Chloe Aiello. Chloe, good to see you as always. Obviously, this has been something that is a long time coming. New York has tried to get this passed for many, many years now. If passed, Chloe, what would the adult use cannabis market look like here in New York?
Hey, Baker, you're absolutely right. This is not just weeks in the coming, it's years in the coming. And this bill does a lot to spell out kind of what this market would look like. So what the bill does is establish an Office of Cannabis Management to oversee not only adult use cannabis, but also medical cannabis, as well as CBD and hemp. It legalizes possession of up to 3 ounces of cannabis flower for anyone 21 years or older. It enacts a sales tax of 9%, which would go to the state, 4% to the local taxes. It also introduces excise taxes based on THC potency per product. It automatically vacates, dismisses, and expunges past convictions that are now no longer illegal under the law. It expands the medical program, adding new qualifying conditions and legalizing smokable flower. It establishes licenses for everything from cultivation and processing to retail, delivery, even on-site consumption, meaning that we could see consumption lounges where people are able to smoke or vape cannabis on-site. It also regulates the number of adult use cannabis dispensaries that the state's existing 10 medical operators can open. However, Stifel analyst Andrew Carter said he thinks it is moderately favorable to these existing operators because it does sort of grandfather them into having vertical integration, which is beneficial for them. It also establishes limited home grow, allowing up to 6 plants per person. Now, Cuomo, as you mentioned, said that this will be a big driver of economic opportunity, drumming up potentially $350,000 in tax revenue and creating anywhere from 30 to 60,000 jobs. Although experts from Pew Charitable Trust did warn us a couple months ago that this tax revenue, at least at first, would be pretty unreliable.
And yeah, the $350 million, obviously a lot for a state like us who's deeply in the red right now. This is part of the reason why I think Governor Cuomo wanted it finally to get passed. But one of the things as to why, Chloe, it hadn't been passed a long time ago was dealing with the tax revenue and the inequities, especially when it comes to different demographics. How does this bill deal with that?
Sure. Yeah. As you mentioned, it does sort of directly fund an equitable and inclusive program. So the way that it does this, tax revenue obviously first goes toward enforcing the bill, collecting taxes, and maintaining safe roads, which was a big concern for a number of lawmakers, worried that this would contribute to an increase in drugs driving. After that, it does fund data tracking as related to who is getting licensed, demographic data on that. It funds research on the impact of cannabis on public health, cannabis use disorder, cannabis use rates, economic impact, things like that. It also funds the cost of, administering incubator programs for the equity program that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. So finally, after all that is taken care of, it allocates about 40% of remaining taxes to public education, so qualifying public schools. 20% would go to drug treatment and education. An additional 40% would go to something called the New York State Community Grants Reinvestment Fund. This would provide grants for qualified community-based nonprofits and other organizations that would sort of reinvest in communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs, providing things like job skill services, adult education, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, things like that. As far as equity, there's more to it than that even. It does establish a social and economic equity program that aims to ensure that people from communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs are included in the new industry, as well as promoting a generally more diverse industry. So it reserves 50% of all newly available licenses for social and economic equity applicants. So it's ensuring inclusion of minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, distressed farmers, even disabled veterans. It does give extra priority, as I mentioned, to people from communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs, or people from a certain income bracket, even people who have experienced past cannabis convictions. Finally, it introduces, as I mentioned earlier, an incubator program to encourage social and economic equity applicants to apply. And once they are granted a license, it does offer them things like small business coaching, low or no cost loans, and all the rest that they might actually need to succeed. Now, as you mentioned, this was a really big deal because previously Governor Cuomo hadn't even allocated any tax revenue specifically to equity. So this goes a long way toward creating a more inclusive industry.
And by the way, Chloe, we should know for our viewers, even though this is going to pass pass because of the supermajority the Democrats have in the state legislature. It's not like marijuana is legalized tomorrow. How long could this potentially take? I mean, I'm thinking months, maybe even years before this is finally official, right?
Sure, yes, this could take quite some time. As I mentioned, there are a lot of details included in this bill, but it does establish, an office of cannabis management. There will have to be a lot more details further ironed out. So this could be up to, a year, even longer, until we start to see sales roll out. But as you mentioned, folks are expecting this to pass. I did speak to New York State Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes on Friday. She said that there will likely be amendments on the floor when it comes into committee this week, but she does expect it to pass. We know Cowen analysts say that it's likely to pass, and Stifel analysts similarly are agreeing that it will pass. And when it does, it could represent a $5 billion market opportunity. There are some 15 million adults in the potential market of New York, so it would be second only to California in terms of size.
Absolutely, especially given the fact that neighbors, New Jersey and Massachusetts, where it's legalized already. Chloe, we know the governor here, Cuomo, has been plagued by a lot of scandals over the last few weeks or so. How were lawmakers really able to squeeze a lot of concessions out of him on this?
Well, you kind of said it earlier. You mentioned that a lot of these areas that were previously sticking points between lawmakers and the governor have seemed to sort of iron themselves out, kind of under the shadow of Governor Cuomo's mounting personal scandal.